Tonight on KQED Newsroom, California's top law enforcement official seeks to block the merger of two wireless providers as the government investigates the dominance of big tech companies. Also, we'll talk with a CEO whose digital academy has revolutionized online education for kids and lifelong learners. And we'll hear how an innovative lab is pioneering new ways to improve the health and well-being of teens and young adults. Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. We begin with the growing battles pitting tech against government. California Attorney General Javier Becerra is leading an effort by 10 state attorneys general to block the merger of telecom giants T-Mobile and Sprint. They filed a lawsuit this week contending the deal would hurt consumers, curtailing access to affordable, reliable wireless service, especially for people in lower income and minority communities. The proposed merger would cut the number of major U.S. wireless providers from 4 to 3. Meanwhile, on the federal front, the number of antitrust investigations against Google, Facebook, Apple, and Amazon are growing. Here now to discuss these issues are Santa Clara University law professor Catherine Sandoval and MarketWatch tech editor and San Francisco bureau chief Jeremy Owens. Nice to have both of you.
Thanks for having me, Thuy.
So much.
On the proposed merger of Sprint and T-Mobile, there are 10 states led by New York and California filing suit to block it. Professor Sandoval, you're a former commissioner of the California Public Utilities Commission. What are your concerns about the proposed merger and how would it affect consumers?
Right. Thank you so much, Thuy, for the invitation. I'm also an antitrust law professor. And so both as a former regulator and as an antitrust law professor, when you look at the complaint, a couple of things really jumped out at me. First of all, the complaint alleges that T-Mobile and Sprint already have over half of the market share in both Los Angeles and New York City. In the first and second largest markets in America, they already have over half of the market share.
That's huge.
It is huge. And then there are a number of markets where they have very large market shares. And as you mentioned, especially, these are both marketed as value brands. And so they've been especially important for lower income consumers, for value conscious consumers, because they compete on price. And so the concern is that as you have two head-to-head competitors who already have huge portions of the market who compete on price, if they merge, that you're going to lessen incentives to compete on price or to provide other innovations such as exemptions from data caps that are important for people to be able to watch content like yours or to be able to watch content like some of my videos that I use for my law classes.
Yeah. And Jeremy, Sprint and T-Mobile did agree to a set of concessions, right? They include not raising prices for 3 years and improving their broadband service, especially in rural areas. And that seemed to satisfy FCC Chair Ajit Pai. He now supports the merger.
Sure.
Why does California's Attorney General Javier Becerra feel differently, though?
Well, this is one area where you can come down on either side, right? These guys cannot compete against AT&T and Verizon very well on their own. Those are two companies with so much behind them in terms of other things they can offer consumers, deals they can make with other services beyond wireless and telecom, right? So if you want to look at what they're competing against, putting them together makes a stronger competitor against the two stronger competitors that are already there. Or you can come on the other side and say, well, these two compete against each other. If we combine them, we're not getting that competition, and that's a problem. So I can see both sides of this from a consumer point of view, that there's a reason to like it, there's a reason to not like it. So it's not a very easy issue.
Well, the telecom companies say that they need to merge so they can innovate, so they can invest in 5G technology and to ward off competition from Chinese companies. Is that a legitimate argument?
So there's a way that we look at this through an antitrust lens as well as a regulatory lens. And so when you look at it through the antitrust lens, the concentration in this industry is already incredibly high, and it makes it way higher. So in terms of antitrust analysis by the books, this is presumptively anti-competitive. And so what they need to do is actually show that there are enough what we call merger-specific benefits so that the benefits outweigh the harms. And the concern is that especially in places like Los Angeles and New York, as well as in places like El Centro and throughout where these companies already have large market shares, that their promises of, for example, low prices for 3 years, 3 years expires pretty soon. My law students will graduate in 3 years.
You don't know what's going to happen after 3 years with prices. Jeremy, you know, what is interesting about all this is if you look at Europe, it's been so much more aggressive on cracking down on tech companies and issuing major fines. Why is it so much more aggressive than the U.S.? And how has that approach helped consumers or the marketplace in Europe in which these other tech companies compete, like Google, for example?
You really have to ask U.S. politicians why the EU has been tougher on these tech companies and others than they have. And I think that's a really strong question to ask as we roll into the 2020 elections, is why have we allowed Europe to take that claim of we are the ones establishing laws, right? They have been able to pass data privacy regulations that the U.S. is still trying to get toward.
And huge fines.
And huge fines. And now the U.S. is saying, well, Europe's doing it. In fact, Donald Trump said this. Europe's going after it, so maybe we should do the same thing. Why are we following Europe? These are our companies, and this should be our issue. But because we've been slow on it, because we've been looking at other issues for some reason, we have fallen behind. And now we're getting there. But we take so long to do everything. When will we ever get done with these antitrust investigations? Will the tech market still be the same when we do? There's some real problems with starting this late.
I think that the difference is actually really a jurisprudence and legal difference and not simply a political difference, because the major difference is that in the United States, in order to have monopoly power, there's no magic number, but we're generally looking for certainly somebody who has over 90% of the market share in the relevant market, and that's a whole debate about how do you define the relevant market. For example, is it all advertising or is it online advertising? Is it a segment of online advertising?
Okay. And none of these companies seem to have 90% market share.
Right. And then, okay, is 80% enough for monopoly power? Maybe. Is 70% enough for monopoly power? Maybe not. Is 50% enough for monopoly power? In the United States jurisprudence, definitely not. Whereas in Europe, the legal standard is dominance. You can have 35%, maybe even 30% market share and have market dominance in Europe. This is
lower
why,
threshold.
Yes. Yes, so this is a legal difference, and this is why Europe was able to reach things like the fine that they did against Google, because their legal standard is different.
Yeah, they put 3 fines against Google, and I don't think any would happen here, right? The Android fine they levied would certainly not happen here.
And let me ask you about something else on a related front. Lots of anti-competitive talk surrounding the big tech companies as well, right? We're talking Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon. The Justice Department and a House committee are both examining antitrust complaints against these companies. Jeremy, what kinds of potential regulations are they looking at? Because it seems like they talk a lot about it, but nothing really happens.
And I think it's going to be the same here. We're going to spend years on these inquiries probably, and absolutely nothing might happen, right? I don't think they're going to be able to bring charges. I don't think there's going to be an antitrust trial for any of these companies. But what might happen is what happened with Microsoft, right? They eventually settled with Microsoft, but in the time that they fought Microsoft over 5 years in the late 90s and early 2000s, it gave breath to Google, to Yahoo, to these younger services that Microsoft may have tried to strangle, but they had to deal with the government, and that gave them the breath to come through.
Well, what about breaking up the companies? Presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren, among many others, are calling for that.
Well, how do you do that? And what is the legal mechanism? And maybe you can answer this, Catherine, that to actually go after any of these companies. Yes, I would love to see YouTube have a spotlight shown on it because Alphabet hides it under Google and says, oh, it's all just advertising. No, YouTube is one of the most important things, and anybody who's a parent knows kids are addicted to YouTube. We need more light shown on that. We need to know more about that property, but Google just hides it within everything else.
Well, and you put your law lessons on YouTube when there's a power outage or some other situation where you can't actually teach them in class.
Yeah, so last year when we had the terrible fires and the Camp Fire, and we all had terrible pollution in the Bay Area, Santa Clara University, the president closed it because the air pollution was so bad. And so I was able to use YouTube and to upload you can do a private YouTube channel to upload videos for my class to be able to deliver the content. Yeah. Absolutely, it's important for educational content.
Let me ask you about the privacy issues as well, because Are lawmakers missing the mark when they only target tech companies when they talk about privacy? Because phone companies also have lots of data on where you've been, what you've been doing. So if they're just focusing on Facebook, for example, with stricter laws, or on YouTube with stricter laws, but not phone companies, what does that mean?
I think that that's a real problem. So I worked for the FCC as a regulator. I directed a department there. I teach communications law, and I don't have a Facebook account. But I can't escape my internet service provider. So if my internet service provider can sell my data, including my location data, then that would be a huge loophole if you only put privacy protection on Facebook or Amazon or some of ultimately what are the apps that ride on the platforms. And so that's why it's important to also look at what the internet service providers are doing when we look at privacy, because actually they have arguably far more data than any one of these other companies do.
Yeah, and I don't see any legal mechanism for them going in and saying you have to break up.
So, Catherine, is there a legal mechanism whereby they can break up these companies?
Meeting the legal standard is tough because you have to define the relevant market, you have to find that there is monopoly power and that there's abuse of monopoly power, or alternatively, they could change the laws and look at whether or not a shift in the law is more appropriate for the shift in technology.
But as you pointed out, that monopoly standard is very high. Thank you. Professor Catherine Sandoval with Santa Clara University, and also Jeremy Owens with MarketWatch. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Now to education. Today, practically anyone can hop online to get help mastering an academic subject or prepping for a test. The Khan Academy, launched in 2008, was one of the pioneers. It uses technology to make a quality, free education available to anyone, anywhere. Each month, 18 million people visit the site to take free courses in 40 languages on subjects ranging from algebra to world history. Last June, Khan Academy expanded its portfolio to include free test help for the law school entrance exam. And joining me now is Sal Khan, the CEO and founder of Khan Academy. Sal, always good to see you.
Good to be here.
Well, we'll talk about the online education movement in a moment, but first I'd like to ask you about the nationwide college cheating scandal, because as you know, this week a former Stanford sailing coach was the first person to be sentenced. He avoided prison time. He was ordered to spend 6 months in home confinement, and that was far lighter than the 13-month sentence prosecutors had sought. What do you make of this whole scandal?
Well, it's unfortunate, obviously. In some ways, I like to look at the silver lining of a very dark cloud. The silver lining is it does put a light on how much inequity there has sometimes been around the process and how strange a process it's been. And so the scandal has a lot of extreme behavior that I think all of us are shocked to know that it was going on. But I think there's been a lot of other area in the gray area where people hire consultants to help their kids write essays and this and that. And I think this puts a nice chill on that, because at the end of the day, the children should be themselves and they should represent themselves authentically in order for it to really be a level playing field.
But it also ignited a national conversation about the SAT test and whether we should even have it at all, because there are some inequities baked into that whole process. The Khan Academy offers an SAT prep course. What do you think about it?
So my view on testing is there's nothing inherently good or evil about a test. What really matters is how it is used. And if someone uses an SAT score to be the defining number of who they are, then that is a very bad use of an SAT. But if it's used as a dimension of, and you look at holistically on other things, the students' grades, their extracurricular, their essays they write, it could be an interesting thing for folks to look at. And the value that it provides to colleges, and I'm not an admissions officer, but I talk to a lot of them, but the main value it provides them is, kids go to all sorts of high schools around the country or the world, and they might recognize a few of the high schools, say, oh, that's a rigorous place. So if they have a high GPA, I can know what that means. But for a lot of places, it's like, well, I don't know how hard it is to get to achieve those things. And so things like the SAT give a signal, once again, not a perfect signal, no test, no assessment. In fact, no dimension. Grades aren't perfect. None of these things are perfect. But in aggregate, they can help indicate what a student, how ready they might be.
All right, let's talk more specifically about the Khan Academy now, because you have more than 100 million users worldwide, an astonishing number. Congratulations on that. Lots of organizations and companies now offer online learning tools. So where do you see the future of education, and where does the Khan Academy fit into that?
Well, we explicitly started off as a nonprofit because there's a lot of things that for-profits can do well, but there's certain parts of our life where there's market failure, and education is one of them, where the buyers, the beneficiaries, the payers are all different people, and there's certain values that we have that, hey, if someone wants to learn something, there should be no friction for them to do it. They shouldn't have to get out their credit card. So that's where we're based on.
And to be more democratic, available to everyone.
Yeah, and we've made that decision hundreds of years ago by introducing free mass public education. Yeah. And so Khan Academy is really part of that same tradition of, can we create institutions that are accessible for anyone to empower them? And say something like SAT. Now we hopefully help level the playing field and the law school admissions test and just your core academic work from pre-K all the way through the core of college. What can we do? One, for people to learn, to have access, and then one day prove what they know to the world. So I see that as our core role, and that's why you see so many users coming to it.
What do you see as the biggest problems in education, the way it's taught today?
I think there's two big problems, and we are trying to tackle them both head on. Actually, there's more, but there's two that we can tackle. There's social issues and wealth issues, but one big issue is access. Even in the United States, a majority of minority-majority schools, I know that's a mouthful, they don't offer things that we would take for granted for your or my children, things like an Algebra 2 class, or a physics class, or a biology class. And so that's just a serious, and even in rural areas, there might not be someone within 10 miles who can teach a proper algebra class or a proper history class.
Limited choice.
So you have this access issue, and not just access to something that is called Class X, but is actually at a world-class level. And then the other is traditional schools have been built on a fixed pace model. And this was a compromise that had to be made a couple of hundred years ago to be able to practically educate most folks. But what happens is, as you get moved in a fixed pace model, you get an 80%, I get a 70%. Even though gaps were identified, we then build on top of those gaps. Eventually, kids hit walls. And what we know is 70% of kids who go to community college in America have to take remedial math, which is a euphemism for 6th or 7th grade math.
And so you've actually referred to it as sort of the Swiss cheese model, right? Because there are all these little holes. And I know that a personal passion of you is to try to build a customized learning model. And you have this new partnership now with the Northwest Evaluation Association. Tell us about the NWEA and what you hope to accomplish through that.
Yeah, the NWEA isn't a household name probably for a lot of people watching this, but it's actually, if they actually talk to their school or their kids, they're probably taking this assessment. 25% of all kids in grades 3 through 8 take this assessment 3 times a year. It's called an interim assessment to just understand where they are and how much they're growing relative to their peers. And what we saw in our SAT work, so now the PSAT, which is taken by 70% of kids in America, it acts as a diagnostic for practice on Khan Academy. And we can see how that helps them as they go to the SAT. And so this other assessment, the NWEA MAP growth assessment, now when the students take that, in the past, the test would be like, okay, you're at grade level, you're not, you grew by this much, you didn't, but what do you do with that? And what do you as a teacher do with it? And so teachers have asked us, ask the NWEA, can we have an actionable path based on this? And so what we've launched is, as soon as they take that test, the next day, the teachers are able to give personalized learning plans on Khan Academy. We call it the MAP Accelerator, so kids can learn. And then the district, the principal, the teachers can understand how that work on Khan Academy is driving growth on the MAP.
And I want to also ask you about charter schools, right? Because there's been a lot of pushback against charter schools recently from not only public school teachers, but also from politicians like Governor Gavin Newsom. He wants to see them held more accountable. Do you think there's a role for charter schools here?
I think there's a role for anyone who is doing something that is helping students and that is moving the dial.
Do you think how do you think they're doing right now, the way the charter schools
I think charter schools are almost like any other, and I'm not an expert at charter schools, but my view is I've seen traditional public schools that are doing amazing things, and I actually think the majority of them, sometimes the lens goes on some of the places where they're struggling, but the majority of schools are doing really good work. And the same thing is in charters. There's some charters that are doing some really excellent work, and there's some charters that are like, yeah, that could be. And so I generally, in any industry, in any space, I always like more transparency and more accountability. So that's always a good thing. But I don't think that there's anything particularly, negative or particularly positive about charters in general. There are specific cases in either case.
And then just 20 seconds, if you can, the current generation of young people, they've grown up with mobile phones, Facebook, Instagram. Do you think their attention spans are shorter? How do you address that in learning?
I think to some degree that's true, but I think also their expectations are now different. And the good thing is we can now give things to them in a more bite-sized ways. But there's research studies that throughout human history, we only have about a 10-minute attention span. So I don't want to blame the millennials.
That's always been the challenge. All right, Sal Khan, founder of the Khan Academy. So good to have you here.
Thanks so much.
Turning now to health. Hopelab is a San Francisco-based nonprofit that's using technology and scientific research to improve the lives of teens and young adults. One of their creations is the computer-generated chat program to ease stress and anxiety experienced by young cancer survivors. The work builds on a video game Hopelab created more than a decade ago that has helped teens with cancer stick to their treatment plans. Hopelab is also working on an app to tackle loneliness among college students, 2/3 of whom reported feeling lonely in the past year. And joining me now is the research director at Hopelab, Danielle Ramo. Danielle, nice to have you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Well, Hopelab has a very interesting model where it tackles health challenges facing teens and young adults, whether it's loneliness or recovering from cancer treatment. Can you walk us through that model?
Sure. We know what works well in a face-to-face format to help people with a whole host of mental and physical health problems. But what we don't know as well is how to translate that to a digital environment in a way that people will actually care about and want to use. So at Hopelab, we pair behavioral science and human-centered design to use tools that will both help change their lives and also feel meaningful and engaging, specifically to Gen Z today.
So why is your organization focusing on improving the mental health and emotional well-being of young people, as opposed to perhaps maybe other issues or problems they may be suffering from, such as bullying or obesity?
Well, Hopelab started out in cancer survivorship with a mission to support young people who had a key problem with sticking to chemotherapy medication regimens. It's really tough to take a pill that has extreme side effects every single day, and that's what's needed to undergo chemotherapy. So there was a real need there to support something that was affecting deeply the lives of young people. Now we're focused more broadly on mental health as well as other physical health conditions that are really under-supported by other apps in the market. Mental health is unprecedentedly problematic among young people today compared to even older adults or other generations of young people.
It is such a big issue, and one of the groups Hopelab has been working with since its launch nearly 20 years ago is adolescent cancer survivors. Well, you've talked about that, and your latest work with them involves a computer-generated chat program called Vivibot. How does that work?
Well, we generated Vivibot with the idea that there's a particular risky time for teens who've undergone cancer treatment as they're coming back into the world after this treatment. This is a time when they're at risk for depression, anxiety, even suicidality, because coming back to the community is not as easy as maybe they would hope or they might expect. So Vivibot delivers positive psychology skills, things like expressing gratitude, mindfulness, looking at the positive side of situations, all delivered through Facebook Messenger in a bot format, a text program. We work directly with teen cancer survivors to put content in there that would be meaningful directly to the population we aim to serve. And we've just finished data collection on a randomized clinical trial that shows that engaging with Vivibot is supporting anxiety reduction among young people after cancer treatment.
How did you get a chat bot to sound like a teen or something that young people would want to engage with?
We went directly to the young cancer survivors themselves. So our model at Hopelab is also to co-create all our products with the young people we aim to serve. So we invited a group of young people who had had cancer to come to our offices, spend a day with us, recording video, sharing their lived experience, and reading and sourcing content for how they talk about cancer, how they talk about coming back into the world, how they talk about anxiety and depression, and all of that directly lives within the bot.
You know, with all this work that you do, and especially a lot of work that you do with Generation Z, these are the young adults who were born between the mid-90s and the early 2000s, what would you say are some of the misconceptions that people have about their needs and their health concerns?
Yes. Well, I work at the intersection of digital health and mental health, and there are some real problems with experiences of mental health among Gen Z today. It is higher than we're seeing in previous generations. I think a big misconception is that technology, or especially social media, is entirely to blame for that. We conducted a national survey at Hopelab last year with over 1,400 young adults, where we found, of course, that social media is quite widely used, almost entirely ubiquitous among Gen Z, but that there are some real opportunities to address problems like depression and anxiety directly using technology. So wouldn't say it's necessarily only the cause of a problem, but also really can be part of a solution.
On the one hand, you're seeing an increase, right, in some of the anxiety and emotional problems that they're experiencing, but you're also saying that social media isn't entirely to blame. So then what is the cause of this increase in what they're feeling?
I wish I could give you a direct, simple answer to that. I spend my career studying things like that. There's no doubt that information that is negative and that can be associated with depression and suicidality, things like bullying, is perpetuated over social media. But I wouldn't say that it is clearly a cause that we know. There are certainly, in some ways, people are more aware of mental health problems. Parents are more aware of things like autism and ADHD than they ever were in previous generations. Some of the mental health problems that we've seen before are quite similar than they were in the past: depression, anxiety. But awareness is one thing, and we're focused on trying to make a real clear impact.
One of your current projects is building an app to help first-year college students overcome loneliness. You know, you would think that college offers lots of opportunities to have social interaction, right? You can pledge for fraternities, sororities, you have dorm life. Why do you think that they're feeling so lonely?
So actually, college students are also unprecedentedly lonely in the United States today. In the past 2 weeks, a third of college students say they felt very lonely. 2/3 say they felt very lonely in the past year. And we think it might be in part because they have unrealistic expectations of what the college experience will be like. They think they'll come, meet their tribe, meet the best friends of their life, and everything they've heard about college is that that will happen. So our app is helping people to develop the skills to actually meet their social goals when college isn't necessarily the experience that they expected once they get there.
So then what skills or exercises do you encourage college students to engage in to help them ease the loneliness?
We've created a set of social challenges, and that is going out into the world and trying to support making social connections. Things like dare to leave your dorm room door open for a week, or walk down the campus, look 5 people in the eye and say hello. But we also have the internal piece, that part that makes it easier for them to process if things don't go as well. So asking them things like, what would you tell a friend if they tried something and it didn't work out?
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
And that is our show for tonight. But before we go, we'd like to mark the passing of a beloved friend and colleague, Linda Giannichini. Linda worked at KQED for more than 40 years in multiple roles, including as assistant director on our show and other KQED productions. She was also the chair of the National Emmy Awards Committee and had served as president of the San Francisco, Northern California chapter of the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences. We will forever miss her generosity, her warmth, and remarkable dedication to her craft.